Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this Global Investigative Journalism Network webinar. Today, we're going to talk about how to acquire free satellite imagery for your investigations. My name is Manuel Andreoni, and I'm a Reuters chief correspondent in Brazil. I've used a lot of free satellite imagery in my own investigations about forests mostly, but we have a lot of experts to talk to you today, and just like to tell you a little bit about why we think this matters. We believe that satellite imagery has become a game changer for investigative journalism because it offers powerful tools to uncover hidden stories, monitor environmental changes, and expose human rights abuses. We all think that satellite images can be costly and complex sometimes, but there is a range of free resources and strategies that make this imagery accessible to a lot of journalists around the world. So in this webinar, we're going to explore how journalists can tap into these free resources to help their reporting and uncover the stories that we think we all think the world needs to see. So in today's session, we have three experts who will share very practical advice and tips to navigate the resources that are available to everyone. You will learn about the best platforms and techniques to obtain this free satellite imagery and strategize how to analyze and process what you find, and as well as the ethical considerations around using them. So you can use these to track deforestation, document urban expansion, investigate geopolitical conflict. In this webinar, we're going to talk about several examples that we hope will equip you to get started and use these in your own story. So I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers. Carl Churchill is a journalist at the Wall Street Journal, where he covers data-driven investigations. He has used satellite imagery to reveal critical insights on environmental crises, supply chain disruptions, and global conflict zones. He brings a wealth of experience in integrating geospatial tools into investigative reporting. Hi, Carl. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Okay, I will get my screen sharing. And real quickly, everyone, I got the flu last week, so if I do not sound at my best, or if I have to take a break to cough or something like that, that is why.
Okay, I'm just going to go and introduce the rest of the speakers, and I'll turn it right back to you, Carl. We also have Yahu Allah, who is an award-winning journalist from Malaysia, who has extensively reported on environmental and agricultural issues there. His work often incorporates satellite imagery to track deforestation, illegal land use, and the impact of human activity on fragile ecosystems. His expertise lies in making data-centric stories resonate with local and global audiences. Hi, Yao. Good night to you, right?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
And finally, we have Laura Kurtzberg, who's a data visualization specialist, cartographer, and a news applications developer with a particular interest in environmental stories. She has extensive experience in leveraging data to tell compelling stories and has worked on innovative projects that make complex data sets accessible and actionable for journalists and researchers alike. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Okay, so I just like to remind everyone that we have live interpretation from English to Arabic, French, Spanish, Russian, and Ukrainian. So you can use these services by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and selecting the language you prefer. We'll also want to hear from you, your questions. So please send written questions and messages in the Q&A box, and we'll get as many as we can at the end of the panel. You can start asking questions whenever you want. Okay, so Carl, we have each speaker has a small presentation to kick us off. So Carl, can you show us your presentation now?
Of course. Thank you, Manuela. Let me. Okay. Thank you again, everyone. I am Carl Churchill with the Wall Street Journal. Being with a large US newsroom, people may assume that we have a lot of secret, expensive tools to access satellite imagery, but we really don't. We have, some pre-existing relationships with commercial satellite vendors, but as I will point out, that's actually the minority of our satellite work. And most of what we do and use is the exact same tools as are available to anyone. But let's start by stating something important. Most satellite data is free, open, and global, with some exceptions for each of these terms. As I said, some imagery is produced by private companies that charge for the data, but because most satellites are produced by government scientific agencies, this public data is theoretically open to all. It's normally, however, difficult to access without specialized knowledge, and there are parts of the globe that can be difficult to get accurate imagery on. However, these are exceptions, and with the following platforms that I will discuss, we can avoid at a minimum those problems with access. This map shows areas with good data coverage by the Sentinel-2 satellite. Everywhere you see in green will have images available about every 5 to 6 days. You notice the only exceptions are small islands in the global ocean and polar areas, and that's just due to the physics of how satellites orbit the Earth. However, this map does not account for ground weather conditions like clouds, which often get in the way of your images. These are a few names to remember for free data. The Sentinel program, run by the European Space Agency, has a high-resolution Sentinel-2 and a regional resolution Sentinel-3 satellite. The US agency NASA has a similar program, except it is called Landsat. And then they also have a kind of coarser regional scale program called MODIS. And then there is Google Earth, which needs a little bit of unique discussion. Google Earth is not a scientific agency, and it's a private company providing you the processed mosaic of many different satellite images, some of which are commercial products. And then it gives you a series of those mosaics that you can pan through time. You have no control over what images are picked, how they're mosaic together, how they're styled, but it does give you access to a lot of really high resolution imagery that you can use with attribution. It's just not the same thing as downloading single images directly yourself, which is why I set it aside. There's many different specifications to satellite imagery, but the most important one to remember as a beginner is resolution, or specifically spatial resolution. This is the quality of the image, how pixelated it is. As a general rule, imagery you have to pay for has the best quality, but anything at or above 10 meters per pixel is likely to be available for free. That is more than enough quality to distinguish individual buildings and easily enough to look at land development trends or anything of that nature. For example, this is a free satellite 2 image of an area in Bahia in Brazil, the same as my previous example. And you can easily see that it captures fields quite well. I'm not going to dwell on this table, but it will be in my slides and it'll be in the recording as a good up-to-date reference of vetted platforms for accessing free imagery. But more importantly, I wanted to save as much time as possible in my presentation for and I say this with trepidation, a live demo, where I gave myself a fictional assignment if I was on deadline to get some free imagery of a particular area in West Africa, and I needed to download it both as a picture and then as image data. So to do that, I am going to quickly unshare my screen and then reshare it with the Copernicus browser enabled, which is one of the current best satellite platforms. Okay, could I just get a quick confirmation that this is all nice and visible?
Yeah, we see your tabs, but we're still on the slides tab.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so this is the Copernicus browser. It opens by default to a quarterly mosaic, which is just many satellite images composited together. If I go back to my assignment, I happen to already know what I'm looking for, but say we wanted to zoom down, we could turn on some layers for reference. And now we can see that while the mosaic is good for giving us a sense of where to look, it's not actually fulfilling our purposes because we have no control over the time of these images, and there's pretty big holes where clouds have been punched out of the mosaic because this area gets quite cloudy. So what we are going to do is we are going to go to the left and filter for cloud cover using this handy slider. And you can see days appear and disappear as they meet our filter. So let's go back a year. And we have a month with a lot of nice cloud cover because this is the drier time of year. November 6th, see if that works. It'll take a second to load. And here we go. So if we turn our reference layers off, this is 10-meter satellite imagery. And we can zoom in. And it's always a little bit trickier on a live feed, but that is a gold mine. I believe it's the Gonkoto gold mine, which was recently shut down. Well, operations were suspended, but it's a very large, active, open pit gold mine. And we can see in pretty good detail the nearby river, the pits, the nearby development area. We can turn on different kinds of what are called like band combinations to see different aspects of the terrain. I won't click on too many of them for time. I just want at least one of them to load. Well, was too slow. But okay, the more importantly, if you wanted to download this, all you have to do is you have to go to the right, hit that button that says download image, and you can download it either as just a picture, which will pull a image with labels, timestamp, attribution, and give you something you can quickly drop into a document. Or you can download it as analytical, and you need to get an account with Copernicus to be able to do this, by the way. You can download it as a TIFF file, which will give you the actual image data as a raster, which you can then drop into GIS software like QGIS. So you see I have some loaded up, but if I go to my downloads, now the image is loaded right into QGIS. And the last thing I will say, and then I am wrapping it up, is it looks different just because QGIS will sometimes automatically change raster settings when something is imported. But it's not actually any different. You just have to modify the settings a little bit to go to like full min max rather than a 2 to 98% split or whatever QGIS happens to be doing in this case. But this is what I do when I get an assignment, And it's what almost all of my colleagues do to some extent when they get an assignment. It's the exact same tools, it's the exact same data sets, and you had access to it all this entire time. So with that, I just want to thank everyone and hand it over. I will stop my screen sharing now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. I'm gonna pass it on to Yao, who's gonna show us a few examples of how to use these in investigations.
All right. Thanks, Manuela. And congrats to Carl for pulling off a very brave and successful live demo. All right. Okay, let me share my screen now and let's see if I can achieve something similar. Not a live demo, but let's see. I'm going to share my screen. All right, so I have about, I think, 8 minutes, and I'm just going to share a few ways in which journalists and I myself have used free satellite imagery. The usage would range from verification in our reporting to visualization, and also to help us in our like checking the field conditions before we actually head into the field. So there are many ways in which you can use satellite imagery. So these are just some of the few ways that I have used it. So the first one would be that we can use it for verification. One example here would be, when a company claims that they have done something on the ground, and it's not easy for us to get there if it's a very rural area, a very remote area, well, we can use the satellite imagery to check if that is true, even before we head there and before we dug further. So this is a story that I did 2 years ago, in which, you can see here, this is an image, two images of different time. On the left would be in 2020, and on the right, here we see 2021. The company claimed that they have not cleared the land, and they're just about to start clearing the land when they submitted a report in 2022. But what we can see here, once we get those free satellite images, you do a comparison between time, it's very clear that a year before they submitted the report, they've already cleared the forest there. So this is a way that we can use satellite image to do verification. Another use is that again, we can track other land use changes over time. In this case, actually, it's not a land use that I would like to share, but more of like a physical, more like a natural change in the physical landscape. So in this case, it's a coastal erosion, where the image that we see here on the right is actually two images imposed on each other. The one on the top is an image from 2017, and then an image on the bottom from 2024, last year. So I have faded out the, lower the opacity of the top image from 2017, and that allows me to show the shoreline that was in 2017 and how it has retreated about 50 meters in about 8 years. Okay, again, this is also a free image. Other ways we can use it is if we want to not track changes over time, but we actually want to find a feature and count how many, like where that feature is, right, and how many times it has happened. So here's an example where this is a story about, okay, I've lost my part. This is a story about a fish that the government is trying to release into the wild to sort of repopulate the wild populations, and they're living in a lake on the left here, right? And this fish lives in the rivers and in the lake, and they lay their eggs firstly on the bottom of the river bed or the lake bed. And that means they need very good river bed or lake bed. However, upstream of this lake, along the river, this river Curau, you can actually use the satellite image, just follow along the river and count how many sand mining operations there were. And because you could clear, and this is free imagery, this is not high resolution. Yeah, it's not high resolution. And you can actually count like how many there were. and I could count, going back across time. Actually, sorry, this is high res. This is Google Earth Pro, so it's considered high resolution, and so I could actually see, where and how many of the sand mining operations. So in this case, I would need a high resolution image to be able to make out the sand mining operations. But I don't need an exact date like May 15, 2020. I only need to know the year that it began. And so although I could not control the exact dates that the Google images were obtained, but it worked for me in this case. Right. Another use, of course, is to show disasters. Either floods or fires could work well. In this case, I use it to show flood. And this image here is not a true RGB color image, but rather I think it's one of those synthetic aperture radar images, right? And it worked very well for me here because wherever it's not flooded, that means there's no water on the surface, we see as this like grayish white dotted landscape. What I wanted to show was that this is a village here on the lower right, the pink house. I want to show that this place floods almost every year at the end of the year. So in February 9th, at the start of the year, it's not flooded. But if we go, if it's working for me, right, so you see like here, it clearly shows that it's flooded. December is flooded, 22, 21 is flooded, blah, blah, blah. So in this case, I chose this kind of image. So this comes from a Sentinel-1 image, which is also available on Copernicus browser, the same platform that Carl demonstrated. And this kind of images compared to the optical ones are better for such situations, because when it's flooding, usually when it's flooding, that means it's rainy, cloudy, so then you get a lot of those like cloudy situations where you can't actually see the ground, right? But with a radar, with a synthetic aperture radar image, it doesn't matter, like the clouds do not matter in this case, right? Okay, so another way to show disasters, this time with a true color image, is like this. So here in red is an area that was cleared. The forests were cleared to be converted into an oil palm plantation. There were other issues here, but what I wanted to show was that after the forest was cleared, when it rained heavily, it did not just affect this area, the local area, but all the soil runoff from the heavy rains all washed into the seas and tens of kilometers out into the sea, reaching the marine parks, like 30 kilometers out into the sea. I thought this was a very, to me, this is a very strong, powerful use of satellite image. It's like, wow, okay. Okay, showing, so one probably quite rare use of the Copernicus browser, the feature there is the elevation profile. So Carl did not demonstrate this just now. He showed us how to get the image, but if once you have seen the image, you can just draw a line on the browser, and then you can actually show the elevation profile along that line. So how did I use this? I use this to measure the slope of an area, right? That was cleared. So here, this line was cleared to build a road, and in Malaysia, there are rules on, if the gradient of the slope exceeds a certain level, then certain restrictions apply. I could not go into this area, so I just use the satellite image or the browser to help me measure that and to figure out what would apply here. Yeah. All right, and this is more of a visualization way. You can use Google Earth Pro to do a video tour of the site or of the route. In here, in this case, I wanted to show my readers that the government plans to do to gazette river buffer 50 meters along on both sides of the river into river reserves, right? And this is all done on Google Earth Pro. I wanted to show readers like what actually exists on both sides of the river. If the government is serious about gazetting this as river reserves, what would they have to deal with? All these factories, or this mining, or these houses that will have to, get all this land and then make the river reserve. And so this, basically shows our reader. And this was done on Google Earth Pro. Right. Okay, here, this is a very handy one for me. So if I know I'm going to some place and it's a place that I'm not familiar with, which is most of the time, and I might or might not have a local guide, but regardless, I will definitely check it out on the satellite image and see what it is there. So this is an example of a place. So if you look at Google Map, it doesn't show anything unless you put on the satellite view. But the satellite view on Google Map could be, could be years ago, right? So I know there's like deforestation here, and I wanted to look it up, like how is it and how can I get there? This was the time that I went last year, in May, and I could, this is a road here. I will be traveling along this road, but I wanted to get into here, this area here. So, I've never been to that place, but I could already see that here, there is a road that I could get in here, travel, northeast, and of course I could use this line, if I can get that line, just to measure. Yeah, is the measurement is probably not showing here, but yes, I can use this to measure. Then I know how far I need to travel and that kind of stuff. I could even see that this is probably a log yard, another log yard here. So I have a very good idea what I would encounter, right? In fact, when I went, I even told my local guide, this is what we'll encounter. And he was very surprised that I already knew these things. So it's helpful that way. Yeah, I think my time is up. The last one is to use Google Street View, but my time is up and it's strictly not satellite image, so we'll stop here for now.
Go for it,
Okay.
because mine is a bit shorter. You can do the last one.
Yeah? Okay. All right. Thanks, Laura. So yeah, okay. One last thing that I always like to use is Google Maps Street View. Not strictly satellite image, but it's still useful. It's free anyway and open. So one way I used it is there was this road, this highway where I knew there were a lot of human-elephant conflict, but I really couldn't get the data on how many incidents there were, So I figured that, and it was during the pandemic, I couldn't go. So then I just traveled along the whole road using Google Street Map, the Street View, sorry. And I just counted how many signs of that, look out for elephants, look out for things. I just counted that. So that is an indicator of the severity of animal human conflict. And actually, then I realized that along the way, I could actually find all the sawmills. Because it was a story on deforestation, I could actually identify all the sawmills along the road and take down their number, take down their titles, and then call them later on for interviews. So that's another way we could use it. All right. Thanks, Laura, for the time. Thank you, everyone. My time's up.
Thank you so much. That's such interesting use. I never really thought about using satellite imagery to figure out where I'm going when I'm on the field. And you mentioned Google Pro. Is that also free? Just to clarify how you obtain that.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's free. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Laura, if you can share your knowledge with us now.
Okay, so there's a question in the chat right now, or in the question and answer portion from Rowan, who mentioned that sometimes we want to get imagery that is not free, and sometimes we want to reach out to a company that provides satellite imagery for purchase, and we would like to ask that company to please provide some imagery to local journalists for free as an exception, right? We'd like to make a request. So my job in this last portion is to encourage all of you to reach out and to attempt to get some of that higher resolution. Normally, it would be paid imagery. Okay. So the main thing is that it's worth a try. Reaching out to companies such as Planet is definitely something that you can do. A lot of times journalists will block themselves from trying because they will say, oh, the people at this company, they will say, no, I'm not even going to ask. But actually, it's worth sending out an email or filling out their contact form, because a lot of times companies like Planet and other ones are actually very interested in having journalists from small, local, global organizations using their satellite imagery. It helps them get their name out there, and it helps them look good to say, look, we're doing some great work and we are making impact, right? And I can say this because I used to work at one such satellite imagery company called Descartes Labs. This company was acquired, so it doesn't exist anymore. But I saw firsthand at Descartes Labs that we would receive some of these requests from journalists, and our reaction as employees or scientists was always, yay, we get to make something that is impactful and not just for the bottom line, right? This is not a guarantee that every single time you will get a response or that you will be able to get those images for free, but it's definitely an encouragement that you should try to reach out, and you might have more success than you expected. So this is my slide that says you can do it, try to reach out. Some tips for that communication, like any kind of communication, is just to be polite, describe what you're hoping to do with that imagery, describe your organization or your newsroom, talk about the amazing project that you will create. This is a win-win situation for you and for the company because they like to see their name out there. And try to keep your email nice and short, with the details that you need, but not overly explanatory in terms of like, giving every single little detail. It's just a first message to reach out. And just keep in mind that it's okay not to be familiar with some of the technical details. You don't have to be a satellite expert in order to reach out. A lot of times, scientists that work at these organizations could even help you do a more specialized analysis. So it's perfectly okay not to be an expert and to approach things with a spirit of curiosity. Another part of my section here is to encourage you to maybe learn some of those technical skills. If you find that satellite imagery is very useful for your investigation, then it's worth dipping your toe into the world of satellite data analysis. And one of the most powerful tools for you, Carl already mentioned, is called QGIS. This is a completely free geospatial analysis software. It's open source, and you have to download it to your computer in order to use it. So it's not in the browser, but it is completely free. And it's kind of like Adobe Photoshop in the sense that when you first open this software, you will see a million buttons and it might feel quite overwhelming. But over time, once you learn what those buttons do, it's actually quite accessible and even over time, I would say easy to use. And one of the nicest things that you can do in QGIS is get one of those analytical images that Carl mentioned called TIFF or GeoTIFF and drag and drop it into that software, into QGIS. And then you have the ability to put other layers on top of it, to crop it, to change the coloring according to your specifications, and many, many more methods. So this is just a quick shout out for QGIS. We won't go into it very much because that would be in a whole other webinar. But GIJN has some content about QGIS, I believe, already. And you can find a lot of tutorials online. You can also reach out if you're interested in learning more about QGIS. I actually put my email on this slide, so feel free to reach out with questions about that. Here are some reasons to learn QGIS. It's free, like I mentioned. It's very powerful. You can actually find some stories that you did not expect by looking at the combinations of layers and the relationships between geospatial variables in that software. And like I just said, there are many, many free tutorials in pretty much every language. If you go onto a website like YouTube and type in QGIS, you will see a wealth of journalists and specialists sharing tutorials and knowledge. So I'm a big fan of QGIS, and I encourage you to learn it if you find yourself doing a lot of stories with maps. And last but not least, there's this question: when should you pay for satellite images? Because sometimes you need something that is very high resolution. Most of the time you do not. Like Carl said, most of the time you don't need the resolution that you think that you need. Usually you can see things from farther away or in a fuzzier format than you would have thought. But sometimes you might need something more specific. Sometimes you need a very particular day or even a very particular hour during which an event may have occurred. If you need control over the particular day and even hour that image comes from, that might be a situation in which you might consider paying for one image, right? Sometimes you need to detect something that is very small. There was a question in the chat about trees on a property. If you need to be counting individual trees, maybe you might need to purchase an image that is quite high resolution. Again, it's a maybe because you can check the free sources first. And finally, if you have a lot of buy-in from your organization, if you have a budget associated with your investigation and getting an image is a very high priority, that's going to be a discussion that you have with your team, right? But if that's something that you're able to do, then you might consider paying or buying image. But I would say that most of the time you don't need to. Most of the time, the free sources will be just fine. And if not, you should definitely consider reaching out to the sources of images directly and seeing if they will make an exception to work with you and provide some of those things for free. So if you have the budget and the ability and the need for some of these images, then maybe you will pay. But otherwise, I would highly consider reaching out, trying to find another way, using those journalism skills to speak with people and negotiate with people at the companies as if they are another source for your story could be a really strong alternative. So my section was a little bit shorter here, but it leaves plenty of time for questions, and I'm looking forward to answering some of those.
Thank you so much, Laura. I just want to confirm that, as someone who's not very technologically skilled, if I can say that, QGIS is very scary at first, but very easy to use and very useful. So yeah, I also encourage you to try it out. Do you know, Laura, how much can these images cost? Just so like a ballpark figure, just so people understand like what we're talking about here.
Sure. I'm honestly not 100% sure how things are nowadays. And
Yeah,
catch-all response would be it depends.
it depends.
Maybe Carl might have a more, or Yahua might have a more recent example from the journalism side.
I got distracted answering a question, so you'll have to repeat the question. I'm sorry.
Then was
Do you
how
have
much could it
do
cost?
you have a ballpark figure for like how much an image can cost when you really need it and you can't obtain it for free?
Well, this is a very useless answer, so I will pass it on to Johan in a second. But we've never needed to pay for an image because our requests have always been very small, very tailored, and they've been passed to us for free.
Yeah.
So which we like it that way.
Yeah, I have bought only once, and that was I think $25 per image, and I think that was the cheapest. I just put the link there in the chat. It's from Skyfi or Skyfi, but whatever higher than that I couldn't afford anyway, so I did not look into it. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, you mostly work with independent news organizations. In your experience, are these companies still welcoming to your request, even though you're not from a big publication that might find it easier to get in some favors?
Um, um, I can't really tell. I mean, I've asked, when I was a Pulitzer Fellow and Pulitzer Center Fellow, and then we had this, I guess, agreement with one of the providers. We could get those high-res images. And then after that, that company either close or merge or they switch direction. And so they no longer provide those to the media. And so yeah, so they rejected me, not because I'm from a small one, but just because they don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And I've not reached out to the other private ones anymore, so I don't know. Yeah, but
Okay.
I would expect that. Yeah. unless they're so generous, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I've also found myself that even when you don't know exactly what you want, a lot of the folks who are working these with these images, they have been looking at these images for a long time, so they can kind of point you to what's interesting. Like, for example, when you're covering a drought or floods, and you think, you know, somewhere is more likely to show an acute situation, then, you know, you can ask them as you would ask a source, like, where, you know, have you seen anything that might be worth sharing with our readers? And, you know, they can be very helpful that way, people who work in these satellite companies as well. Carl, can you talk a little bit about like other, y'all talked a lot about like examples with covering environmental issues. You've used it to cover some other issues as well. Can you share a little bit like how, what other stories these might be helpful to?
Oftentimes we will use imagery to cover war-related stories. Big examples being the war in Gaza and then the war in Ukraine, where you know there's so many like small examples, but like you know, for example, with the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, when there was a lot of concern around that plant from Russian attempts to sabotage it, you know, we would take like sentinel images of that plant. Maybe we also would have a planet image of the plant. Our reporters would look at it and they would kind of annotate it for us, all the different aspects of the plant, where they were looking. We'd kind of pan through time to see if there was evidence of changes. And we would kind of produce graphics using the satellite image to show all the different aspects of the plant. And we also did it to look at fortifications being dug over time. You know, you can't really see like troop movements in a satellite image necessarily, just because they're often happening around the times that the satellite is taking the picture. Sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's night, sometimes it's just the satellite's not there when they're moving the troops. But you can see, oh, in this field there didn't used to be a trench. Now there is a trench. And the satellites can kind of show that. And so similar stuff for Gaza, where we could, you know, see evidence of demolitions, evidence of the aftermath of a bombing campaign in imagery, and kind of do the before and the after to see where the effects have been taking place.
Oh, that's really, really interesting, really useful. Yeah, I was wondering, Laura mentioned like a little bit about like the high res versus medium resolution images. Can you tell us a little bit like what's the difference? Like when do you actually want a high resolution image?
There were only two times when I really needed high resolution images in my, I guess, like 4 or 5 years of investigations. The first time was to really to identify, because at the Sentinel range, the Sentinel satellite range, if there's like a clump of trees, you can't really tell, you know, the trees apart, right? You know, palm trees and then forest trees, you can't exactly tell them apart. If they're not fully matured. And there was only once that I needed the high res to really tell if this clump of trees are actually like, you know, forest trees, that was of I suspect they were of an endangered species and they were left there, and everything around them was cleared, right? And that was the only time that I really needed one. And I got it at the time, and it was really useful. And the other time was really to sort of like to spy on a rare earth mining facility. I couldn't get what I wanted, and so it didn't work out there. But actually, like I think high res images for me weren't so crucial in all my investigations. Yeah, or maybe I should say it's a limitation that I have come to accept and I work my way around it. I think I guess that's the sadder truth. I work my way around it. Yeah.
Carl, can you comment on that a little bit as well? When do you need a high resolution image versus another quality?
High resolution images, they're really best for, yeah, like individual, like I'd say as a general rule, they're best for like smaller scale OSINT kind of stuff where you need to see like a single building. You need to see like a single tent. You need to see really crisply like the edge of a house, something like that. Um yeah, it's, situations like that where if we're really trying to dig into like a very small tight area and we want to be able to see crisply every single discrete feature, then we're going to jump to Ask Planet or Maxar for a high resolution image because it just makes it so much easier to understand what's going on and annotate that image rather than trying to triangulate inside kind of the boundaries of pixels.
And typically, like when you ask for that, like, are they sending you a bunch of images, or is there a point when they say, "Hey, dude, you've asked for too much, and we're done"?
So they've never done that. Well, so it's actually quite the relationship between us with Planet and Maxar is quite different because the two companies function quite differently. And Laura, you can speak to this as well, I'm sure. But Maxar, I think, vends more and works more with the US military. So they tend to be a lot tighter lipped and their images are a lot harder to work with because, for example, they won't have like identifiable IDs. It's just you get like a gigabyte JPEG that's really detailed, but you have no idea where it is. And then they'll kind of get annoyed if you ask them a bunch of questions or you keep asking them for images. But with Planet, it's, oh, email such and such person at Planet. If I'm looking for a Planet image, I'll ask my editor. He says, oh, this is our Planet contact, email her. I email her. I tell her what I'm looking for. She responds back with like a secure folder holding some Planet images. If we need anything else, we go back and forth. It's a very one-off friendly
Right.
relationship. They've never come off as annoyed or overtly cold.
Do you have a comment on that about like how to not ask, like to maintain these relationships healthy, Laura?
I mean, it's like any other relationship as a journalist with their source, right? Just being polite, respectful. If the answer is going to be no sometimes, then understanding that. But most of the time, if you already have a good working relationship with someone, then maintaining that is the easiest part. The hardest part is getting noticed in the first place and finding that email and that person, the correct person to reach out to that can actually help you, right? So something that I ran into recently was not for satellite imagery, but it was for map loads with Mapbox. And this was with a nonprofit newsroom that I work with called Ambiental Media in Brazil. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to have more map loads on Mapbox than the free tier allows. And it just took, I would say, 4 or 5 different emails for us to find the correct person to help us with that. But once we found that person, then emailing back and forth with them was very nice and wonderful. So it's just using those journalism skills to find the correct person to reach out to, word your email, like I said in my slide, in a polite and concise manner. And that's really it. And some of it is going to be luck too, right? That person checking their inbox at the right time and seeing your email pop up at the top, honestly. So sometimes multiple requests or multiple emails are going to be necessary. I would say like 4 or 5 attempts, not like 20, right? But just trying a few times and using some good old-fashioned cold reach out, cold call, cold email sometimes will actually have a better result than you expect. So just trying not to be shy and making that attempt is the first step. And 9 times out of 10, you won't even need to, like Carl and Yahua mentioned. Usually you can use the free images and the free software, and you won't even have to worry about it. So it's an encouraging environment. And actually, I saw one comment in the questions in the chat of someone from a small company saying, hey, if you would like to use our AI satellite detection model, please reach out. And he just put his email in our chat. So that's just a sign that companies out there are hoping and willing to work with journalists.
Lovely. Okay, I'm gonna pass it on to Emily because we have a lot of questions from the audience. So thank you so much.
Hi everyone, thank you for that really interesting discussion. We've got loads of questions, so I'll just get to them, but something that people are really interested in, and I'll put this to the panel as a whole. I don't know if anybody wants to specifically answer it, but in the cases of maybe the Middle East and Ukraine, where there's a limited access to satellite images and the quality isn't that great, do you have any advice for overcoming problems like this and accessing recent and high quality images from war zones?
I've done a bit of that, so I could probably answer. At least with both of them, it's actually surprisingly the same as any other area. You know, you need to reach out to the commercial vendors and ask them if they have imagery. For Ukraine, that's been much easier. For Gaza, there's been, at times a pretty intense moratorium on data coming out of Gaza. Though, at least in my experience, you can. I don't know the exact terms of like what is going on, but we have been able to get, Planet and Maxar imagery of Gaza before when we ask for it. I don't know if they behave differently for other groups asking for that, but I know it exists because I've seen it and I have worked with it. That's the commercial side. For the free side, there's lots of satellite images of Gaza from like Sentinel-2, Landsat, because those satellites, they're not behaving according to some sort of like training, like go here, take a photo here. It's just spinning around the Earth and it takes a photo in a set pattern. And if that pattern overlaps Gaza, it's going to take a photo of Gaza. And I have never heard ever of any of those satellites, like those public satellites, withholding images of certain areas due to political reasons. Maybe it's happening. I've never heard it. I've never seen it. And I could pull it up right now and scroll through satellite imagery of Gaza. I've done it before. So at least for Sentinel-2, it exists. The issue in Ukraine, honestly, is Ukraine is just a lot cloudier in general. And there was a long stretch where Ukraine was just constantly cloudy and there was no imagery of any kind over like all of Eastern Ukraine. But when it's clear, it's surprisingly not as more difficult to get imagery as for non-sensitive parts of the world.
Thank you. And just kind of on that topic of accessing imagery in certain situations, somebody's asked whether there's any confidentiality concerns associated with the purchase of imagery. For example, if somebody's looking into an oil company and they own the land, can they be notified somehow, or is it tracked? And whether it can be flagged in satellite imagery that a certain area is like public land or government land. I know that's a bit of a long question, but if anybody has anything to say on that.
I can speak a little bit about that. A company might dedicate its own resources to trying to find out who is investigating them, but there's no automatic, alert. So I would just encourage that. For example, if a journalist downloads something from Copernicus browser that shows something that is impacting a particular government or a particular company, there's no way for that government or company to find out just because you're using Copernicus, right? So I would just say employ regular digital security safety measures. If the same things that you use to protect your browser activity in general as a journalist can apply here as well. So there's no additional danger, but I would just say using safe browsing practices overall is a good idea.
Thank you. Another question that we've had is whether there's any tool that provides night satellite imagery. So we know it's harder to read, but many illicit activities take place at night, and satellite images could provide a lot of help in detecting it. So is that something that's readily available for free, or?
I personally haven't really used satellite imagery at night or from the nighttime, so I'll maybe leave that up to the other two panelists, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I don't know the answer to this too. Yeah.
There are, so because of the way satellites kind of need to gather data in order to like make recognizable imagery, they normally don't either, they're not physically there at local nighttime. Like Sentinel-2 generally tries to capture an image around 10 a.m. local time. Don't quote me on that, but that's my understanding everywhere. And normally they don't like try and capture nighttime imagery because it's really hard to process, really hard to see, and you don't get that much out of it for most intended purposes. Okay. I do believe there are nighttime Landsat scenes, but they're not really advertised, and you may need like a bit of scientific understanding to know what to do with them. But that's the highest resolution one I can think of would be Landsat nighttime. There's also what's called Veer's nighttime lights, which just capture like nighttime light radiance, something like that. And then for anything that's what's called a geostationary satellite, which would be Himawari, Meteosat, GOES, which are satellites that were basically locked to the same point of the Earth's surface and just take a photo of that same position. They're going to capture nighttime views as well. But again, unless you kind of know a little of what you're doing, it's not going to be as readily usable. But I can do a little bit of research and maybe paste a link into the chat.
Thanks so much, Carl. So this is a difficult one, but I think if we could start with you, Yao. What kind of ethical considerations should journalists keep in mind when using satellite imagery, especially in kind of difficult situations? Do you have any advice for people who are kind of dealing with either war zones or conflict afflicted areas?
Yeah, I saw that question, and actually, and I was asking myself, what ethical considerations do I had when I was using? Actually, frankly speaking, in all my practice, I've never even considered that what I was doing would have any ethical implications, because everything that I was looking at was either in public or in, yeah, it was nothing of any sensitive nature really. So yeah, sorry, I no, blank for me. Like I have no idea. Yeah. Yeah. If Carl or Laura, yeah.
I would just say the same way that we keep our ethical considerations active for a story without satellite imagery, it's the same. Sorry, there's some noise in the background. it's the same when we're using satellite imagery. It doesn't suddenly change, right? Because of the method. So using that same pulse of checking in with your ethics and with your team is going to be awesome for every kind of story.
Thank you. So we also have like a practical question for when you're looking into a specific area.
Can I just say one thing on the ethical considerations? I think what's really important is what you look at on a satellite may sometimes look like you figured it out, that you know exactly what you're seeing, but that's not always the case. So really double, triple checking if what you think you're seeing is what you're seeing is really important. Because we're not, there is data, et cetera, that, people who are really big experts on this can help with figuring out, is this actually brown? This is actually a mine, et cetera. I think that, is actually a reporting consideration, but also an ethical consideration for you to actually present these images as what they truly are.
Thank you. And I think just on that, we've had another kind of question for beginners, which is what are the most common mistakes that you might make when you first start working with satellite images? And is there anything that you would flag to beginners? I don't know if anybody wants to start with that. Laura?
Sure. As I said on my slide, it's okay not to know. So it's all right to approach things as a beginner with the spirit of you might make some mistakes. And I would just say to prevent some mistakes, to try and reach out to experts on the topic of your choice. So like Manuela said, sometimes it might be someone who works at a satellite imagery company who can verify that what you're seeing is what you're seeing. Other times it might be a scientist at your local university who studies whatever issue, mining, deforestation, or whatever you're looking at, that you can get their verification, like, hey, look at this picture. Am I seeing things? Common mistakes, it's going to be very dependent on the subject matter that you're reporting on, but I'll leave it open to my fellow panelists if they can think of some specific ones. But I would just say always having someone look at what you're doing, and a lot of times local scientists are a great person to reach out to for that.
For me, I think at the start, it's either one of two. It's either I would think that satellite images won't help in this case, and then I completely forsake that route of investigation or reporting, and I don't use it. I think that's a mistake because in my line of work, environmental reporting, it always happens in a place, at a locality, and so it's always worth checking out the satellite images of that place, to look for whatever of the evidence that we are looking for. It always helps. And then the extreme other end is to, as Manuela said, to trust it too much or to over rely on it. In my situation, in my case, there would be sometimes when you look at it and it seems it's all brown. The land, it's all brown and you think it's all cleared, but actually there are like minute like shrubs planting on it that you actually could not see with the Sentinel-2 resolution, right? And because we were so sure, I guess, that, or we thought that, yeah, the land has been cleared, right? And so then we jump onto that and we present that as like concrete visual evidence. But hey, if you just switch it to another like NDVI or something, which is not the optical one, which actually show vegetation health, then suddenly you realize, oh no, this is actually not like, that it tells you something else. So I would say those are the two mistakes, either not using it at all or over relying on it too much and just trusting it like that here.
Thank you. Carl, maybe you can start with this one. We've had another question for beginners. So if you're starting to use a portal and there's a certain area that you want to look at, is it best to get the latitude and longitude coordinates of the place that you want, from Google Maps and put that into the portal, or can you find an area by searching place names? Like, what's the process for finding the location that you might be interested in?
Great question. Both of those methods work. If you go to the Copernicus browser and there's a search bar on the top right, you can search by place name. You can also search by coordinate. I think they get all their place names from OpenStreetMap. I think that's where they get everything from. And it's not, thank you, Laura, for nodding and confirming. Sometimes it can be dicey. What I do oftentimes is I'll go to like the general area and I'll like triangulate between OpenStreetMap, Google Maps, and just using the image to kind of find exactly what I'm looking at, and then confirm in the image that I'm looking at what I exactly mean to be looking at. Because, for example, sometimes you put in a place name in OSM, it'll give you a location, but that's clearly not where it actually is based on the satellite image. It's actually over here. You know, it says the town's here, but that's a field. You just kind of have to use your common judgment. But if you have coordinates, drop that into the search bar, hit go, it'll center to that, you're good.
Perfect, thank you. I think this will be the last question before I hand it back to Manuela. So when it comes to historical satellite imagery, is there any difference amongst the free tools of what's available, and how far back in time that we can look at that?
I don't remember off the top of my head how far back things like Google Earth Pro go, or how far back Copernicus browser go, but I would recommend to check them both for going back in time, but I'm not sure the difference off the top of my head.
It depends on where and which satellite. Sentinel-2 goes back to 2016, the last 3 months of 2016. Google Earth, I think, goes back to like the 80s, 70s. The longest running continuous satellite program, I believe, is Landsat. That goes back to the 70s, but it gets really spotty before like 1990. So when you're going back in time, you have to kind of become a little bit of a historian, and you need to find out what satellite programs were active at the time, if they took a picture of that place. I actually answered a question about this, but for historical purposes, it's often good to not pin all your hopes on satellite imagery, but also look at aerial photography, because lots of countries have done like aerial imagery campaigns, you know, and then and you can kind of maybe sift through that and see if there's something. And you can also look at declassified spy satellites. I think GloVis, which is one of the USGS browsers, has some spy satellite. I think it's called like Konos, like spy satellite collections from like the 60s, and you can scroll through those. It's just, it gets weird and historical the further back you go. But before like like everything from like maybe 2000 forward, or especially like 2016 forward, you're solid. It's before then it starts to go downhill.
Thank you so much. Manuela, I'll hand back over to you.
Well, thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Before we close, I'd just like to thank the Global Investigative Journalism Network, our audience today, which had a lot of great questions, and of course, a very big thank you to our speakers, Carl, Yao, and Laura. Thank you so much. Be sure to watch our Twitter feed and website for details on future events.